for joining us today for Jennifer Schaus and Associates in our Webinar Wednesday program, live from Washington, D.C. We are uncovering each part of the DFARS, or Defense Federal Acquisition Regulation Supplement, every Wednesday at 12 p.m. Eastern. As you know, the DFARS are the rule books for contracting with the Defense Department, and we are moving sequentially, starting with DFARS Part 201 in January, and we'll be finishing with Part 253 in December. Our webinars are every Wednesday and are provided complimentary, and they are recorded and can be downloaded from our website and YouTube channel, which now holds over 450 of our government contracting webinars. In the interest of time, we do not take questions, so if you do have questions for our speaker, we will have her information on the last slide of the presentation today. And a special thanks to our educational sponsor, the National Veterans Small Business Coalition, for making these webinars possible. The NVSBC is the largest nonprofit trade association for veterans, and please visit their website for more information. Virginia PTAC at GMU offers free one-on-one counseling to firms in Virginia on federal, state, and local procurement topics. Online resources and group trainings are free with no restriction on business location. If you are interested in learning more, please use the links provided to explore what PTAC can offer. Set Aside Alert provides up-to-date news, information, and opportunities for small business federal contractors. Their daily opportunities alerts assure you won't miss important sources sought and solicitation announcements, providing details so you can jump on the hot ones. Every 2 weeks, they deliver concise breaking news, events, regulations, and teaming opportunities. Okay, and now a little bit about us. We work with U.S. federal government contractors, including product, service, and software firms. Our services range from market analysis reports to contract vehicles and compliance, and more information can be found on our website. We also have opportunities for your organization to advertise in our newsletter. We now reach over 23,000 subscribers, and this includes both contractors and government. Contact us for pricing information with the email shown on the screen. I also wanted to inform you of a new series in 2021. We have launched a monthly series called the GovCon Live Q&A Cafe. This is a live webinar series held each month, and these will take place on the second Friday of each month this year in 2021 at 12 p.m. Eastern. We have assembled a group of 4 panelists who are subject matter experts on a specific federal contracting topic, and the panelists will make a short presentation about the topics listed here on your screen, and then take your live questions about that topic. So, for example, January started off with our panelists covering CMMC, and next month on February 12th, another panelist will cover OTAs. Our panelists include attorneys, consultants, and other industry professionals. You can sign up on our website under the Q&A Cafe tab. Sponsorships are available, and you can email hello@jenniferschaus.com for a media kit with pricing details. Also note that you can use the code DFARS for a $15 discount for each live Q&A Cafe webinar series. Okay, and now to introduce our speaker, Judith Araujo. Welcome, Judith. We are glad to have you here with us today, and I'll now turn the floor over to you.
Thank you, Hunter. And I also want to thank you all for tuning into this webinar on DFARS Part 204, Administrative and Information Matters. Can you go to the next slide, please, Hunter? This clause is fundamental to defense contracting. Some of the provisions cover the more logistical aspects of defense contracting. However, other provisions are more substantive and are currently hot topics in the defense contracting space. I'll endeavor to cover a bit of it all, but I'll try to go deeper into the hotter topics as opposed to the more logistical subparts. So let's start with an overview of the subparts that appear in DFARS Part 204. These subparts are contract execution, contract distribution, safeguarding classified information within industry, contract reporting, contract files, taxpayer identification number information, system for award management, annual representations and certifications, uniform procurement instrument identifiers, commercial and government entity code, prohibition on contracting for certain telecommunications and video surveillance services or equipment, procurement acquisition lead time reporting, uniform contract line item numbering system, anti-terrorism awareness training, safeguarding covered defense information and cyber incident reporting, disclosure of information to litigation support contractors, and cybersecurity maturity model certification. As you can see, these subparts run the gamut and cover important information for all defense contractors. Next slide, please. All right, let's dive in with subpart 204.1, which is titled Contract Execution. This provision is quite literally about the execution of the contract by the contracting officer, and it sets forth some of the procedures for the contracting officer signing the contract, such as including the contracting officer's telephone number and email in the signature, and allowing the contracting officer to sign bilateral modifications before the contractor signs. Subpart 204.2, Contract Distribution, instructs contracting officers on how to distribute contracts and modifications to contractors, including on the electronic distribution of these documents. This subpart also provides that the Electronic Data Access, or EDA system, is the Defense Department's main tool for the electronic distribution of contract documents and contract data. The EDA has been incorporated into the Procurement Integrated Enterprise Environment, or PIEE, which includes other features that assist in the electronic management of contract documents. Also, this would probably be a good time to mention, for those that don't already know, that government contracting is the land of acronyms, and there are many more to come. All right, next slide, please. Okay, subpart 204.4, Safeguarding Classified Information Within Industry, is the first subpart that touches upon a major theme of this DFARS Part 204, which is protecting defense information from security threats. One of the protections that this subpart provides the government is that it states that employees of the DoD or the Armed Forces who are on site at a contractor's facilities and engaging in oversight activities retain control over their work product, whether that work product is classified or unclassified. Also under this subpart, contracting officers have to ensure that solicitations that require access to classified information or controlled unclassified information, or CUI, contain certain security specifications. The subpart also requires certain contract clauses to be included in solicitations where the contractor is going to have access to or will generate the sort of information that is unclassified but may be sensitive and inappropriate for public release, ultimately restricting or otherwise limiting the release of this information. This subpart ends with a few provisions which may apply to contractors engaged in nuclear-related activities and contains the U.S. International Atomic Energy Agency Additional Protocol, which serves reporting and inspection functions. Next slide, please. All right, subpart 204.6, titled Contract Reporting, guides the agency on reporting contract actions in the Federal Procurement Data System, which is now located at beta.sam.gov. You can use this system at beta.sam.gov to search for solicitation numbers or contract numbers, and it will provide you with the solicitation and contract documents, including amendments and other postings related to the procurement. Subpart 204.8, Contract Files, contains the procedures for the contracting officer's closeout of contract files. While some of this subpart describes the more logistical or technical aspects of a contract closeout, this subpart also touches upon some issues that may be of interest to contractors that have longer term contracts, because it discusses the negotiated settlements of certain longer-term contracts, that is, contracts that were entered into at least 17 years before the current fiscal year. These provisions for these older contracts take into account the consideration that payment records may have been destroyed or lost over the course of time, or that the time or effort required to establish the exact amount owed to the government or to the contractor is not worth it based on the amount at issue. So it provides for a simplified accounting to negotiate the any final settlement amount of the contract closeout. Relatedly, this subpart also sets forth the various contract retention file periods that may be applicable depending on the contract. Subpart 204.9, taxpayer identification number information, is, I believe, the shortest subpart of DFARS Part 204, and it merely provides that the Defense Department uses FPDS, or now SAM, to meet the taxpayer identification number reporting requirements. Next slide, please. Subpart 204.11, System for Award Management, or SAM, is one that, in my experience, contractors overlook without realizing it's important to the government contracting framework. Contractors must be actively registered in SAM, meaning maintaining the registration and making prompt edits to any information that changes. Some of the information that must be maintained on SAM.gov is pretty basic, like the name, DUNS number, and physical address of the entity. Subpart 204.12, Annual Representations and Certifications, touches upon another aspect of SAM, wherein the contractor is required to make representations or certifications as to its compliance with certain contract clauses at least annually, so these should be updated sooner if there are any changes. This slide contains a sampling of some of the clauses covered in the reps and certs, such as covered defense telecommunications, equipment, or services representation, which we'll get to later in this presentation as well. The disclosure of ownership or control by a foreign government, certifications and representations related to the Buy American Act and Trade Agreements Act, among others that are listed here, and then also beyond. It's crucial to remember that the government is relying on the accuracy of the information the contractor reports on SAM, so that inaccuracies in these reps and certs can affect contract award. Really, this isn't something that I would just tick off the list of things to do without giving thought to the accuracy of the statements, because it's easy to miss things, which is something that I've seen contractors do time and again. I would recommend having someone dedicated to completing a sufficiently thorough review of your SAM registration to maintain truthful information, representations, and certifications in your registration. In my practice, even one of the first things that I do, if not the first, when I'm interested in learning about a government contractor, is to check its SAM.gov registration to see the general business information and to see what sort of representations and certifications the business is making. Another thing to note is that SAM allows access to past representations and certifications, so it's possible to pull the historical record and see how these representations and certifications have changed over time for any given contractor. So I would just note that that is a part of the public record that can be accessed on SAM. Next slide, please. Great. Subpart 204.16, Uniform Procurement Instrument Identifiers, pertains to the unique alphanumeric identifier assigned to each solicitation, contract, order, agreement, amendment, or modification. This section includes a description of the elements of these alphanumeric identifiers, as the letters or numbers in various positions correspond to different information. For example, if there is a Q in position 9 of the identifier, then the instrument is a request for quotes. If there's an R in this position, it's a request for proposals. And if there's a B in the position, it's an invitation for bids, among other options as well. So each of these positions in this unique Uniform Procurement Instrument Identifier does tell you something about that solicitation, as opposed to just being a random string of letters and numbers. Subpart 204.18, Commercial and Government Entity Code, states that the contracting officer will assist contractors in obtaining cage codes if necessary, and also requires the contracting officer to maintain cage code files with this information, including updating it if there are any changes to the entity structure. For example, if there was a merger acquisition, which may require a novation agreement and affect the cage code for an entity. All right, next slide, please. All right, Subpart 204.21, Prohibition on Contracting for Certain Telecommunications and Video Surveillance Services or Equipment. This subpart is certainly a hot topic in government contracting right now and will be for the foreseeable future. This subpart implements the Huawei and ZTE ban that has seen some developments over the past few months and years, and reflects the key effort that the government has made in the past few years to protect its supply chain from security threats. The basic definition underscoring these provisions is, quote unquote, covered defense telecommunications services or equipment. These covered defense telecommunications services or equipment mean telecom equipment produced by Huawei, ZTE, or any of their affiliates or subsidiaries, telecom services provided by these entities or using their equipment, and telecom equipment or services produced or provided by an entity believed to be owned or controlled or otherwise connected to the People's Republic of China or the Russian Federation. Essentially, for defense contractors, this means that when the government is carrying out covered missions, which are defined as nuclear deterrence missions and homeland security missions, the government cannot procure or obtain any equipment, system, or service that uses covered defense telecommunications equipment or services as a substantial or essential component of any system or as critical technology as part of any system. Contractors will also be required to make representations as to whether they do or do not provide covered defense telecommunications equipment or services as part of the products or services in the performance of a contract. If the contractor selects that it does provide the covered equipment or services, it will have to make additional representations and disclosures. Similarly, there's a new representation that applies at the solicitation stage, where the offeror must represent that it will or will not provide covered defense telecommunications equipment or services as part of its offered products or services. Again, here, if the contractor represents that it will be providing such equipment or services, it will need to make additional disclosures about the equipment or services. There is a provision for the Defense Department to obtain waivers on a case-by-case basis for compliance with this prohibition. And we have also seen over the past year or so that the Director of National Intelligence has granted DoD temporary waivers to delay the implementation of this prohibition. However, we are moving in the direction of requiring full compliance. So contractors should be aware of this prohibition, and if you haven't already, begin assessing whether this ban affects any of the equipment or services you offer or provide to the government. Understanding that there are still a fair number of uncertainties related to this prohibition, in particular to the definitions set forth, as it's not entirely clear what words such as use or substantial or essential component or critical technology mean, and those are key to the prohibition, but additional guidance will be needed to understand exactly how those will play out in practice. All right, next slide, please. Okay. Subpart 204.70, Procurement Acquisition Lead Time Reporting, basically attempts to ensure that the acquisition process for contracts valued in excess of $250 million is streamlined and timely completed. To this end, under this subpart, the contracting officer sets completion dates in the PIEE for acquisition milestones, like the acquisition strategy approval date, negotiation or discussion completion date, and contract award date, among other milestones that are required to be set for these acquisitions in excess of $250 million. Under Subpart 204.71, Uniform Contract Line Item Numbering System, the process for establishing and assigning contract line item numbers and subline item numbers is set forth. These numbers are used to identify each separate item or service that the government is acquiring. Subpart 204.72, Anti-Terrorism Awareness Training, is what it sounds like. It requires anti-terrorism awareness training for contractors that regularly enter federally controlled facilities or military installations. This training can be done through a DoD-sponsored and certified online program for Level 1 anti-terrorism awareness, or under the in-person instruction of a qualified Level 1 anti-terrorism instructor. Next slide, please. Okay. Subpart 204.73, Safeguarding Covered Defense Information, is an essential subpart for the security of defense information. It goes back to that theme that I mentioned, that among the more logistical aspects that this DFARS part covers are a few subparts that really get to the crux of the security of defense information, and this is certainly one of them here. So contractors are required to provide adequate security on all covered contractor information systems. A covered contractor information system is a system that processes, stores, or transmits covered defense information. And covered defense information means unclassified controlled technical information or other controlled unclassified information, or CUI. CUI can fall into a number of categories, and these categories can be found in the CUI registry. If you search for that, you will encounter a list of the categories and subcategories of CUI, and this registry includes things like financial information, health information, other privacy information, and procurement and acquisition information, among many others. There are dozens of categories of CUI that contractors should be aware of when they're determining whether a system processes, stores, or transmits this covered defense information. This subpart sets forth the NIST SP 800-171 as the standard for compliance with security requirements. It also requires that the contractor rapidly report cyber incidents to the Defense Department. The subpart lists the contract clauses that will be included in solicitations and contracts to effectuate these provisions and protect the covered defense information. So what you'll see in this clause, among a few others in this DFARS part, is that these clauses are translated into these subparts are translated into contract clauses located at DFARS 252 point whatever number, and that corresponds to the policies and directives that are located in this part. So there are a number of contract clauses that you'll see in your defense contracts or solicitations that are underscored and fundamentally based in this subpart 204.73. Contractors, information security officers should be familiar already or familiarize themselves with the NIST SP 800-171 framework and compliance requirements, as there are a number of requirements that must be met in order to satisfy this framework, and you also must ensure that you have a current assessment verifying compliance with this framework that is not more than 3 years old, unless the solicitation specifies a lesser time. Subpart 204.74, Disclosure of Information to Litigation Support Contractors, pertains to the particular protection of sensitive litigation information that is provided to litigation support contractors, such as a lawyer or an expert consultant, and the litigation support contractors' use and handling of such information. So this again goes to the theme of just protecting the defense information from security threats or other issues. Next slide, please. All right, subpart 204.75. This is the last subpart of this DFARS part 204. This subpart pertains to the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification, or CMMC. The CMMC is one of the latest efforts to protect the Defense Department's supply chain from cyber threats. Again, here we're protecting the defense's information and other items from cyber threats or other threats. Here, cyber threats specifically, but again, going to that theme. The CMMC's rollout has definitely been affected by COVID-19, so I expect to see a lot of action that we thought was coming in 2020 or early 2021 to begin rolling out later in the year, which is all to say that the CMMC is a hot topic to watch in 2021, and it also makes sense as to why there was a presentation this month that Jennifer Schaus and Associates hosted related to this topic, since it is definitely on everyone's mind. The Defense Department will be rolling out rules and requests for proposals that specify the requirements for various levels of CMMC certification. And the CMMC accreditation body, or the CMMC AB, will oversee and establish assessors. So what we'll ultimately see are certified third-party assessment organizations, also called C3PAOs, that will be reviewing and assessing CMMC compliance. And it is expected that by 2025, contractors and their supply chain will need to meet some form of CMMC certification. So again, this is one to watch. And to that end, my colleague Susan Ebner, who was on the panel earlier this month, has written frequent blogs on governmentcontractingmatters.com related to the CMMC and the various developments that we've seen in this area in the past few months or year or so. All right, next slide, please. Well, it looks like we made it through DFARS Part 204, Administrative and Information Matters. I want to end by thanking Jennifer Schaus and Associates for inviting me to speak, and thanking you again for tuning in.
Thank you, Judith, for a great presentation and sharing your time with us today. And like she said, thank you to everyone who joined us for this webinar. And the recording will be on our website and YouTube channel within the next 24 hours. And feel free to join us next week as we cover more of the DFARS.